Hey guys, I've been on YouTube for about 3 years now, and I realized that I failed to make one of the most important videos on this channel, and that is talking about my rating system. Now, I never thought that I needed to make this video. I thought my rating system was just so self-explanatory that people would eventually understand how I rate films the way I do. But I still get comments in the comments section where people are still a tad confused as to why I rate films the way I do. So this is the video for those people so that there is no more confusion, so that we can be on the same page. And also, I do realize that people rate films differently than I do. Everybody has their own unique way of rating films, as do I. And so this is just the way I rate films. This isn't going to be necessarily your way, and it shouldn't be, but this is why I rate films the way I do. Now, if you've watched any of my reviews, you'll know that I use a 1 to 10 scale. I don't use any decimals. I don't like being cluttered with too many numbers. IMDb uses a 1 to 10 scale, and so that's what I'm going to do, and it has never steered me wrong. So starting with a 10 out of 10, the highest you can possibly get on my list, this is where I put my favorite movies of all time. Now, I feel like a 10 out of 10 for a lot of people, they often just put films that they don't really have any flaws with. A 10 out of 10, I feel, has been heavily abused to the point where it doesn't mean anything anymore. And I want my 10 out of 10s to mean something. So I put my favorite movies on this list. These are films that I think are absolutely perfect, and they're films that are very personal to me, and they might not be personal to you. There's films on this list that people would not put on their favorite films list, but I would, because they mean something to me. Now, coming in below that is a 9 out of 10. This is where I put films that I really don't have any problems with. These are films that I also consider to be some of the greatest films of all time, but they might not necessarily be some of my favorites, but they're pretty close. These are just perfect films that are some of the greatest films of all time that you've all seen. You know, you're going to see movies like 12 Angry Men on here, Vertigo, those types of films. So really, in a way, I guess my 9 out of 10 is what most people's 10 out of 10 would be. Now, below that, we have an 8 out of 10. Now, if anybody has watched my channel, you will know that I abuse the hell out of the 8 out of 10. It's what I give most films that I absolutely love. 8 out of 10s are films that are just great films. These are films that I could sit down and watch any time of the day and always enjoy them. They're just great to watch. They're fun. They're entertaining. They're some of the best films of any given year. But I don't think they're necessarily perfect. They might have flaws in them. They might have pacing problems. They might have editing problems, acting. But at their core, they're still great films, and this is where I put those films. Below that, we have a 7 out of 10. This is where I put films that I genuinely really like. They're not great films. They might have a couple of problems here or there. They might be slow. They might be a tad boring at times. And also, this is where I put a lot of underrated films. Films that I think are extremely ambitious, that people just kind of gloss over or look over and think are incredibly bad films or just mediocre films, but there's something in them that I find. I look at the passion of the filmmaking, the acting, and that really bumps those films up for me. So you're going to see a lot of films that I find underrated on here, but you're going to find a lot of films that are familiar, that are just solid, good films, but nothing particularly spectacular or anything. Now, 6 out of 10s are kind of average films, but it does have a wide array of what you would consider average. These films can either be films that I do genuinely enjoy, but I realize they have a ton of problems. They might not be the best films out there, but for the most part, you can sit down and enjoy them for the most part. They might just be good films that are extremely flawed, or they might just barely get over and have enough enjoyment in them to warrant a 6 out of 10. These are just, again, very average fine films that aren't like the best things ever, but they're not terrible. 5 out of 10 is where we start getting into our more negative side of ratings, and this is where I put a lot of very mediocre films or extremely disappointing films. These films might have some good stuff. They might have good acting, good cinematography, good directing, but they might be boring as hell and just very mismanaged. There might be a lot of problems. A film that really sums up how I feel about a 5 out of 10 is the movie The Goldfinch, which was one of the most disappointing films I've ever seen. It was just so dull, but had a lot of good things about it too. This is definitely a rating where it can go either way. Either it's on the higher end of a 5 out of 10 where it's almost good, or it's really low and just not a great film at all, not even really a good film. And speaking of not very good films, we have a 4 out of 10, which a 4 out of 10 is a bad film. Not the worst thing ever, of course, because, you know, that's much lower, but a 4 out of 10 for me is basically a bad film that shows a lot of effort. There's clearly some good acting in it, there's maybe some good imagery, some good directing. You can tell that, you know, they at least tried in what they were attempting, but, you know, it maybe doesn't pan out very well. It's probably a cluttered mess of a film, but you can tell there was effort in it. There might be some things you enjoy about it, but overall you can't deny that this is definitely not a good film. At number 3, it's kind of the same thing, but a little bit on the worst side. These are films that are bad and have very little effort going on in them. They have really bad acting, bad directing, just a lot of bad stuff going on, and there's very little in redeeming qualities about them. These are just straight up bad films. These are the majority of films that you will see on my worst lists. But I would not go so far as to say that I think these are some of the worst films of all time. They're just genuinely bad films with not much going on for them. Now, a 2 out of 10 is something that I do struggle a little bit with when I'm trying to decide if it's a 1 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10. But how I determine a 2 out of 10 is basically, this is one of the worst films I have ever seen in my life. But there might be slight effort to it. Like, think of a bad comedy. Just the worst comedy you can possibly think of. You might have 1 or 2 jokes that you might kind of chuckle at. It's basically stuff like that, where you can tell maybe the director was trying for something. Like, there's maybe some effort in there, but it's very, very minimal. Everything in it is poorly done. Maybe the directing, the editing, cinematography, all that, but it's just in a completely trashy film with very little of merit to it. And finally, at a 1 out of 10, this is what I consider to be, of course, one of the worst things that I have ever seen in my life. There is nothing good about these films. These films are either extremely disrespectful, just disgusting to watch, or just irresponsible, disrespectful, as I said again, and just the worst of the worst that you could possibly put onto the screen. Again, I don't put very many films on here. Then again, I haven't seen a lot of 1 out of 10s. Usually, the bad films that I see at least have minimal effort to them, but these are where I put the worst of the worst. You're gonna find movies like The Cat in the Hat on here, Death of a Nation, other things like that, Master of Disguise, just things that should not exist. And that, guys, is my rating system and how I decide what goes where. Now, in terms of films that are maybe so bad they're good, I do rate those films a little bit differently. Obviously, so bad they're good films, they're not good films. But I think of them on terms of enjoyment. Like, as a bad movie, how good is it? Like, movies like The Room or Troll 2 or, other films of that nature that are considered so bad they're good. How do they rate on a scale of 1 to 10? And depending on that score, I will give them any rating I see fit. So bad they're good movies will get a score of a 6 to a 10 out of 10. I mean, I have The Room as a 10 out of 10 because it's not a good film. It's just not a good film. But I enjoy it so much in everything it does wrong that it ends up doing everything right. And that's why I rate it that high. So that's how I rate So Bad It's Good films, and that's how I rate films in general. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you guys out a little bit in understanding my rating system a little bit more. I hope it was extremely informative. If you still have questions, please tell me in the comments section below. I will try to answer them as best as I can. And maybe in the future, I will do another video of these, basically talking about how I review films. That might be something that would be very beneficial to anybody here on the channel. But thank you guys for watching this, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next review.